Eva and Ron, I've been looking at your book, Taking Your Meetings Out of the Doldrums, which apparently is doing very well now, and in which you talk about preparing for meetings and presenting some methods to be used during a meeting so that they are more constructive. What types of negotiating dynamics occur during business meetings? Are there power games that often occur in meetings?
Sure, there are lots of power games, and most of them have their beginnings outside of the meeting. That is, there are strategies planned by subgroups if there's a decision to be made about something controversial. There are sides aligned. There are strategies worked out by the leadership if they want to get a particular point of view across or a particular decision made. There is even careful use and non-use of parliamentarians that I know about. So there are lots of games being played in the decision-making processes, whether it's a business meeting of an organization or it's a meeting within an organization of the top management with other managers or presidents with vice presidents.
Can you think of any particular types of power games that occur?
Thinking in terms of meetings now, one of the most typical power games is getting and holding the floor. And it seems to me that one of the most important planning jobs is the job of setting up procedures that guarantee fairness of participation opportunities, rather than provide the base for one side or another, or one person or another being able to control. Because after all, what's available in a meeting is time. And then how time gets divided up is one of the major strategies for either supporting creative problem solving or for permitting the escalation of conflict.
Another game that gets played is the I'll tell you what's good for you, or I'll tell you what's good for us. The I being the power person, the chairperson, who makes his or her case at great length and then allows very little deviation from that before a vote is taken.
Now there's the mobilization of precedent. There's the traditions, this is the way it's been done, or this is the way that the norms say it should be done, and using that whole structure as a basis for influence and presuming it's a base for power to be the representative of the past.
Another interesting one is the use of bylaws in partial ways by the experienced participants to hoodwink new participants who may not have them right in front of them, so that bylaws get quoted out of context to serve a particular purpose. I think another one is the whole way, another game that gets played is the whole way seating arrangements are either paid attention to or not, so that in some groups there are certain traditional ways for people to sit. And I've just been working with a group where literally you moved up the table as you moved up in the organization. And it didn't say so anywhere except that was habit. So that the low power people sat the furthest distant away from the chair people until we took a look at, is this a good way to really get new people to participate? And it was agreed it wasn't. But, you know, after all, really, meetings are a series of games, or can be looked at as a series of games, both positively and negatively.
Those were the opening minutes of my conversation with Dr. Eva Schindler-Rainman and Dr. Ronald Lippitt, in which they described several negotiating dynamics which occur in meetings. Eva and Ron will describe a variety of methods on how to deal with these negative power games and how these methods can make negotiating with your management team more productive. Some of the questions we will examine are how to deal with hidden agendas, how to legitimize and constructively use value differences and conflicting viewpoints, how to increase constructive participation and keep a high level of involvement and interest, what to do about people who dominate a meeting, and how to eliminate some of the common disruptive tactics which occur during meetings. The methods Eva and Ron will share with us philosophically and pragmatically tie in with our earlier discussions on negotiating for mutual gain and collaboration skills for negotiations. They are designed to build a supportive climate within your management team and to increase the team's capability to resolve conflict through creative problem solving. Dr. Rainman and Dr. Lippitt are nationally known management consultants and experts in management team building and group dynamics and conflict resolution. Dr. Rainman is based in Los Angeles and has co-authored with Dr. Lippitt several books on management team building and organization development. These include Images of Potentiality, Team Training for Community Change, and Taking Your Meetings Out of the Doldrums. Dr. Lippitt, a co-founder of the National Training Laboratories, is now president of Human Resource Associates in Ann Arbor, Michigan. One of the main sources of the negative power games which occur in meetings are the hidden agendas people bring with them. As we continue our interview with Eva and Ron, they share several methods for dealing with these hidden agendas.
I think one of the most serious errors that most planners of meetings make is the assumption that the time of a meeting should be primarily spent in the total group as a total group. Because with the amount of hidden agenda that's usually active, it's impossible with a group of 10, 15, 25, 30 for the hidden agenda to get out and worked on and legitimized and creatively used if that group stays as a group of 15 or 20 rather than subgroups for a good part of the meeting. To work in subgroups where there can be some anonymity of 3 or 4 or 5 sharing the problem and reporting it out from their group, various kinds of caucus procedures, various kinds of interest group procedures, various kinds of position development procedures, so that everybody has a chance to be an active participant, because one of the things that most activates irritation, conflict, position taking is feeling that it's a desperate situation. I've got to get my minute.
And I don't count anyway. I probably can't get it in. I think that really leads to the whole business that we propose in the Doldrums book, which is that good meetings, to be productive and participatory, need good planning. And that among the things that one really has to look at is what are the hoped for outcomes? What are the purposes of this meeting? Who's going to be there? And a good deal of time being spent on the who, not just how many, but who are they? What subgroups do they belong to already? How new or how experienced are they? How knowledgeable are they in the kinds of things to be considered? And then picking up on Ron's point on subgrouping, taking a look at if these are the people who are coming and these are our hope for outcomes, what are going to be the best techniques and methods to utilize to achieve those outcomes? And 99 out of 100 times, I think we'd say, one of the methods to utilize is subgrouping, whether that's in 2s or 3s or 4s or 5s, depends on the size of the group and the task to be done. But I agree totally that one of the real traps, particularly business meetings, fall into is that people must all sit around a table or in rows, depending on the size, and that you get participation. Here comes trap number 2. You get participation by asking people, and how do you feel and what do you think? You don't get participation except on a very selective basis that way. You get it because you utilize other measures, like the subgrouping, like self-inquiry, where people are asked to jot down their ideas about something before speaking up and giving them a minute or two to think. Like a reading period. If you're going to have a decision made on the basis of materials that need to be known, the sending out beforehand and saying people should read it is very pious, but doesn't work because a lot of people don't read it, or if they have, they've forgotten it. So it's awfully good, we feel, to put in a short reading period so people can refresh their memories, if nothing else, on the particular agenda item that they've now come to. And I guess one more comment I'd make is that meeting planners need to make a decision about what is supposed to happen to the item. That is it a decision-making item? Is it an information item, which can just be either on a piece of paper or can be just announced? Is it an inspiration item? Is it a discussion only with a decision some other time? What kind of an item is it? And then it seems to me the point that Ron made around timing can be decided on, because if you know what you want to have happen and what's supposed to happen with a particular item, then you can begin to allocate some time, and that time, we feel, ought to be visible to the participants so they know this is a 15-minute item, this is an hour item, and can either agree to that or change it.
One of the procedures within meetings, give you an example the other night, is to make legitimate and to set up the procedures for what we call value difference dialogues or position difference dialogues. The other night, working with a meeting of school administrators and board members, school board members, we identified rather quickly 5 major issues around which there were differences of position. And the first inquiry was, let's see if we can find out where our differences are. We mentioned that before. And with the showing of hands on who had what kind of positions on these several different issues, we set up value dialogue subgroups in which every group had to have representation of the different positions. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't a good group unless the differences were there.
All the way from agree to disagree,
From agree to disagree, And then they had a procedure to use. Within 10 minutes of the starting of their discussions, they got a little slip handed to them, which asking them to rate how well they felt they were being listened to, what kind of difficulties they were having listening to others. And they jotted these down on their individual slips and shared the data and had to be consultants to themselves on how can we improve our dialogue for the next round that we're into. And by the time half an hour was up, they were terribly excited about reporting out some of the changes that had happened within the group, the clarifications, the shifts, and in 3 groups a surprising consensus had arrived. But these excitements, you see, were subgroups now reporting out to the whole group in the next phase of the meeting, which was total group session.
Besides value dialogue, another method we use a good bit in trying to get people away from a problem and pain kind of standpoint to really looking at where they want to go, so that if they're in great pain around some particular item, like, let's say, membership. There are a lot of groups now that have been exclusive, that are having tremendous negotiations around whether to admit people different from those whom they've always had. And rather than trying to get into an argument about how good it would be to have so many of one variety or another variety, or whether to mix men and women, or whatever the issue is, take a look at a year hence, or 2 years hence, or some time period agreed upon, what the situation would be like if we had a different kind of membership. And what pleases us about that which is going on that is really very different from the way we're operating now. Well, now there's some very interesting things about that technique which we call imaging, or image as a potentiality. And based on some research that has been done, it really says it is easier for people to be creative and productive and effective in problem solving if they can do it from a basis of where they want to go, rather than from a basis of the pain they're having and experiencing. And so we tend to say, take a leap in time forward and take a look at, for instance, community-wide, what kinds of things are going on in the community for youth, let's say, that really please you, and they've come about as a result of all the organizations and agencies that work with youth collaborating. What's really going on in the community? Now, to be quite specific, a group might come out with such things as cooperatively sponsored daycare centers, or groups tailored for young people who are not in any of the established organizations. These are real ones that have happened. Or storefront libraries for young people who can't get to downtown, or whatever. And then you see the same thing that Ron just mentioned in terms of the value groups that he had in that meeting. Groups can form around those things that you really want to have happen. And those have to be realistic and doable and seeable and smellable, so that they aren't just idealistic, though there may be idealism involved, but realistic tasks that can then be worked on. Okay, how can we get storefront libraries? What are the possibilities of cooperative or collaborative daycare centers for children of working mothers? So whatever it is. And you tend then to coalesce difference by the agreement people have of where they want to go, rather than busying them with the pain of the present or the past, or where they either have been or have not been, and feel very badly about and very uncreative about.
See, to relate that to the conflict notion more clearly in terms of meetings, starting with any kind of a sharing or summarizing of issues in the here and now activates all the images of conflict, of defensiveness, whereas going ahead in time gives the opportunity, as Eva says, for groups to define outcomes which are much more likely to be points of consensus, desired outcomes in service to clients or in relation to each other or whatever, and then to come back, and then you get back to focusing on the problems of collaboration around what are the best ways to get there. And so now the implementation issues of we have different ideas about methods of getting there have a new way of supporting compromise discussion, because there is a common goal out there that we have as the criterion for what's going to get us there.
Well, I think the important ingredient of that whole method is that by and large people have a chance to regroup, whether it's a group of 30 or 300, and join that group around the subject that they most want to work on. So that what you get is a different texture of people working together. That is, the people who come to a table, let's say, and they all want to work on storefront libraries for young people, find that they have something in common, and that's what they focus on instead of focusing on what their differences are. Now, that doesn't mean that they may not have differences in how they'll do it, but the overriding force of, boy, we've landed on something and this is our first choice. And by the way, that's an important part of the method, in that when people regroup to work on something they really have some commitment to and some ownership of. If there are 30 people who want to work on one topic, we simply make 3 groups of 10 or 4 groups so that people really get their first choice. And that makes a lot of difference also in terms of conflict resolution, because so often people are assigned to work on things where the ownership is not number one and where their commitment is not number one.
See, a while ago we talked about notions of fairness or justice being leverages for working toward dialogue between warring parties. Here, I think in meetings, the notion of not wasting time represents an important kind of leverage, and one which supports a technique that we use a great deal, which we call the stop session technique. That is, everybody is concerned about the idea of productivity and effectiveness and not wasting time, because the universal notion of meetings is that a lot of time is wasted. So that we have typically little slips with maybe 2 scales on in terms of how I'm feeling about the way my ideas are getting used, and how I feel about the way we're making decisions. They'll rate on a scale and then jot down why they rated where they did. Then the group will quickly share the data and have to become consultants to themselves on how to improve their productivity. And this very often is a tremendous support and leverage for dealing with time wasting, dominant figures, getting off the track, spending all our time spinning our wheels, and the various kinds of phenomena that are partly conflict, of course.
Ron, what you're saying is that an important part of a meeting then is evaluating the process by which that meeting has occurred.
Is occurring.
No, you use the past tense as over at the end of the meeting.
We're doing that in the middle.
The important thing is to have it at least in the middle, if not earlier, the first check, so they can utilize their data to improve.
See, I think we even go to the other end and say that post-meeting reaction slips, unless you're going to have another meeting right away, really are kind of useless. Because by the time the conference happens next year, the world has changed and the people have changed,
or even next week.
So the data really isn't very relevant. But to have a stop session in the middle of a meeting, or near the beginning when they've done enough work to be able to look at it, may make all the difference in the world. I remember a really very funny thing that happened earlier this year on a college campus where we were meeting in a large gym, and it was around improving student life on that campus. And we did a stop session sort of an hour into the morning because the tables had been working on various tasks. And in the middle of the stop session, one group got up, lifted up the table, lifted up their chairs, and moved themselves totally out of the room. And when I went to ask what was the matter, they said, well, we were having a great time. We just couldn't hear each other very well. If we hadn't had a stop session, we wouldn't have known why we were yelling at each other. So, it doesn't always have to be a complicated process around that somebody didn't get listened to or didn't get a chance. Sometimes it's as relatively simple a matter as the physical surroundings not being conducive to whatever it is they're trying to do.
Really focusing on the process of meetings. There's a lot of the things that you have talked about is in terms of making sure that the process is effective as opposed to getting on with the task.
Well, to make the task doable. In fact, we met over this whole issue. That's how we first started working together, is that we see task and process as very side by side, and that they've got to be considered together. So often when you get very task-centered, the whole process gets forgotten. Conversely, if you're only interested in process issues, you're not very likely to get the task done.